Good evening and welcome to Season 5, Episode 15 of Inside the Rookery, where we are talking to Sage, games designer, a Lawhammer cast member, streamer, and all-round epic human being about homebrew world building, something that here at the Rookery we are all very passionate about. Welcome to the stream, Sage.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. As always, we've got lots of questions pre-submitted by patrons from our Discord community, and we'll be taking the questions from the comments as we go. Do you want to give yourself a little introduction on top of what I've done, Sage? It can be as short or as long as you like.
Yeah, sure. I think other than the stuff that people might have seen me do on Lawhammer, I actually used to mainly be a variety streamer during the pandemic, and I got involved with a lot of TTRPG stuff during that time. And since then, every few months or so, we try and do like a world building panel that also raises money for charity and that kind of thing. When we can with people online from different parts of the TTRPG community. So yeah, that's the main thing. Also, I'm quite new to Warhammer, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of questions people have.
Thank you. And we are the Rooks from Rookery Publications. I'm Lindsay Law, host of the show and also writer and editor of various RPG books, including with 4th edition. Andy, do you want to introduce yourselves? We don't usually do this, but I decided we would today.
I don't. Thanks for the warning. It's not. We're almost at the end of the 5th season. One might hope everyone knows who we are. But yeah, sure. I'm Andy Least. I also was a writer on 4th edition, in the sort of core book starter set and various things like that. Part of Rookery Publications, and I'm a Lawhammer player, and I'm also, for my day job, a teacher, an English teacher.
I wear all the hats.
Yes, you do.
There we go. That'll do.
Thanks for that introduction. Right, we'll jump straight into the questions then with that. It says, Seagoat says, it says Ringmaster, but I reckon Wrangler of Things might be a better title. Renaissance Man. Kilishandra is up with the first question, and she asks, why does homebrew world building matter? As always, Sage, you get the first shot at the question.
Done. Yeah, so I think that's based on the name of the world building panel that I do, which is called Why Your World Matters. And the idea kind of originated because a few years ago now, on Twitter, there was a whole debate about some people deciding that they wanted to tell others that they didn't want to hear about their homebrew world. And then there was an upsurge of others who were saying, no, actually, we do want to hear about your world, and it is important, and we don't want to lose that. So that was why we made the panel in the first place. And I guess, there's merit and a place for starter sets, for pre-written campaigns, all that kind of stuff. But the joy of TTRPG is that you can make it your own. So it matters because homebrew is the essence of TTRPGs, right?
One of our guests from earlier this season, I think it was episode 9, B. Sherry, who's they've been on before. One of my favorite things on Twitter is reading tweets about their world, because they always have really interesting and unique ways of looking at the world. So yeah, I'm in favor of the sharing your homebrew world.
And it's kind of how it all starts, right? Like we've spoken before about the genesis of beginning to play these games, and before we play formal TTRPGs, like we play various forms of make-believe, and that's all homebrewing, right? That's all conjuring up a world, creating characters and a world for them to inhabit, and storylines for them to kind of act out. So yeah.
I mean, I'll bluntly say that every single setting we know started as a homebrew. All of them.
Yeah.
Every single one. So why do they matter? Because they're speaking to the very creativity that our industry, that our passions, that our hobbies are pretty much centered around. And without home brewing, it all just comes crumbling down into repeated Marvel movies forever.
Before I got into TTRPG, me and my brother and a girl called Katie had a world based around Squirrel, that was me, Hedgehog, that was my brother, and for some reason, Cheetah Monkey, who was Katie.
Cheetah monkey.
Monkey, nobody knows. We do actually know what a cheetah monkey was. It was a lemur. She'd got like a clip-on lemur, someone, but we decided it was a cheetah monkey. So yeah.
I thought, wasn't Tarzan's chimpanzee called Cheetah? So I thought it might be that.
No TV, Andy.
I
don't know
thinking,
where Cheetah Monkey came
can't
from.
tell to look at the camera. I was looking at Andy there as the one person who demographically might have known the answer.
I have sadly never read a Tarzan book. My Edgar Rice Burroughs lovely in a different area.
Just the movies, though. Just
but
can't help there.
I don't know if anyone else did this, but then we would create elaborate, like at the end of the play date, we would create elaborate scenarios for the long-suffering parents of us both to watch these, like cheetah, monkey, hedgehog, and squirrel do Robin Hood and that kind of thing. It's really bizarre. But yeah, I think we all have that spark in us when we're kids to create and to love creating. Andy's giving a thumbs up. It must have been cheetah. There you go.
There's also just on that last one, like there's also a philosophical question, isn't there? Like in that anybody's implementation, like Sage, you mentioned like starter sets and setting books and things, but anyone's implementation of those, I would argue, as soon as it sees contact at the table, becomes a kind of homebrew anyway. So I think anyone being precious about the canonicity of particular things is on a hiding to nothing.
Yeah, we did have Diane on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Diane was on, and so check out the interview with her. But she talked a lot about her childhood and how that developed her as an author. Yeah, I think in terms of canon makes it your own when you're a creator, and on the other side of things, it was really interesting when we were doing our first playtest of the Ship of Fools to see all the stories of how people used our characters in our world in so many different ways. And I thought it was like this really beautiful multiverse that as a creator, like in one world, one character might have died, but in another one, they like your favorite character lived on forever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like a living fan fiction of the stuff that you made, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, sounds great. I think as well, I growing up undiagnosed ADHD, spent a lot of time in my head, and there's something that people are talking about now in the neurodivergent community about creating stories for yourself to motivate you to do the things that you have to do in your day-to-day life. And I remember doing that for myself, where I used to pretend, I don't know, I had to finish solving this math problem, or my kingdom was going to, end up in a war, or I don't know, and just kind of like create things in my head. That way.
I do that with like planks and things. Like if I do that, I imagine it's one character in particular. She was pretty stubborn, and I imagine she's like, this is really weird, but like literally like holding a bridge, and people are having to walk over her. Like she's saving her children, she's saving her friends, and that like lets me hold it for like way longer than I would if I just was like, I don't know, sitting there being like, this is drag.
Yeah, for sure.
Suejan says, Suejan, undiagnosed ADHD. I resemble that remark. I was not diagnosed until my 40s. Yeah, I think it's more common in the TTRPG community than any of us knew when we were younger, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least we seem to congregate a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So Seagoat asks, when changing pre-established worlds, how much consistency do you try and fit with what already exists? Do you just throw out what needs to be excised from the original?
Well, I think that really depends on what kind of game you're playing. If you're just playing a home game with your friends, then just keep the things that you like. That's the important part. Keep the things that you are interested in exploring, the things that matter to you, and the rest can sit there and they're just never talked about, never explored, or just removed entirely if you really don't like them. When we're talking about things like Lowhammer, obviously there's a little bit more that we want to stick to certain pre-existing things. But at the end of the day, even with that, I'm assuming, not knowing what our campaign is going to be about, I'm assuming a lot of it is also whatever Andy thinks is the best thing to do.
I agree completely in that when you're making your own games at home and trying to decide what works best for you and your players, the canonicity, how well does it fit within the existing canon of work for a particular setting, can literally get to fuck. It's whatever makes you happy. It's what makes your games cool. And what makes you, when you sit down, go, hell yes, I want to play this week by week. And that might be a particular rule, that might be a particular aspect of the setting, that might be something that is problematic for everybody else out there, but works really well for your individual group. And that's okay for your own stuff, but as long as everybody sat down and talked it all out and they're all happy with what you're doing. Now, obviously, if you're doing something a bit more public, like what we're doing over on the Lawhammer side, that means that we've got a different discussion to have as players, but also with the audience, because we're presenting a world that a lot of people already know. And I have to repeatedly say things like, yeah, well, you know, we might go in a different direction. And there will be warnings about that, in particular, for example, with Nippon. And we'll probably get onto that later, so I won't dive into any depths there. I'll also add an extra third wheel to this slowly expanding bicycle, and say that if you're writing for somebody's existing setting, so for example, if I was writing for, let's just go Warhammer, because that's easy, then I absolutely need to entirely not just make sure that it's consistent, but where it isn't, always have justification and always have reasons for why it isn't. Now, often, as many of us know, one of the core reasons for a lack of consistency in Warhammer work is a lack of research on behalf of the individual writers. So their reason is nothing more than, I didn't know about that other bit, which is why Games Workshop need to have somebody on their side saying, yeah, no, you can't do that because it contradicts everything we've done previously. So when you're working for other people, do your homework is what that amounts to. But sometimes that homework, as in the case of Nippon, isn't really going to help you, because the existing work was created in the 80s, and let us say that some of their cultural sensitivities were different.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Roderick said, this isn't a question from Roderick. In fact, he's got two non-questions. We'll come to the other one later, but says, looking forward to hearing all about an expanded Nippon made in collaboration with someone who knows more about Japan than the GW team did in the 80s. By the way, Sage, I've just realized I'm sitting in your chair, like the fox is behind me. Sage's past seat today.
I was going to add as well, like, for some people, knowing all about the lore of a setting that they're playing and making sure that the economy makes sense based on the things that they can grow in that certain type of land, and you know, all the little details about how the politics all kind of works together is really important to them, then yeah, go for it. Like, we see that a lot in our Discord, where people ask questions about, you know, what title would this person have, or what if this person had this lineage, how would that affect the world? That's your, you know, cup of tea, then go for it. But that doesn't necessarily have to limit you if it isn't.
We'll go to one of Kilishandra's questions, just because we were talking about Nippon. So when you were building a new version of Nippon for Lawhammer, did you have any specific design goals in mind? And I would say this is very much a collaboration between Andy and Sage. You know, it's not like, Andy, Law, you have design goals that... Why are you looking at me like that?
Because
I've heard you talk to Sage repeatedly, because she has kind of that much more knowledge about real world Japan that can inform Nippon. It doesn't need to be built on it directly. It doesn't need to be the same as it, but it can definitely help inform it in a way that makes Warhammer, you know, feel richer and not like, as Roderick says, the
less cultural appropriation as well. Like,
yeah,
you know,
yeah, for sure.
So maybe, Sage, when you got involved, what were your goals in getting involved and working with Andy on this?
I mean, I think it all started when we were talking about what kind of character I wanted to play. For those who don't know, I'm half Italian, half Japanese. So we were talking about, you know, do we go down like the Nippon side? Do we go down the Chilean side? What kind of thing do I want to explore? And we realized that Nippon, not having been, well, it has been established, but maybe not very well, not anytime recently. It maybe gave us more range and more ability to kind of play around. And then when it came to actually thinking about it, I think some of the stuff that was important to me was the idea that as a culture, as a community, as a religion, they really respected and found importance in spirits, and that spirits in their area inhabit all things. And then we took that idea and its ramifications into each aspect of the things we developed.
And what's been quite nice is the bridge that gives between your character and my character, the elf, because she also sees the world in a different way, not like that necessarily, but it can, it sort of extends the discussion that they can have as a party.
Yeah. Well, in one of our pre-stream sessions when we were talking about what they have met beforehand, Elemental Wife and Yume met because Elemental Wife could see her fox, right? So
I just followed it. What's this? Why is there a fox spirit?
On my side, I had a couple of very strong goals. One was obviously to examine something that had been poorly examined before in the past, and show people out there that there is no reason that they can't take aspects of the world and make it their own. For All the Games Workshop has presented a very big, very established world. There is no reason that you can't just take it yourself and make it your own entirely. And this was a good way for us to do that, for us to just make some shit up and have some fun with it. And who doesn't like doing that? As we said right at the very beginning, creativity and all of that comes with that is at the very heart of our hobby, and we enjoy this shit, so let's do that. But beyond that, I also wanted to build something that wasn't just fantasy Japan, because that tends to be where everybody always starts. And I'll just bring up a single example of why that really isn't very Warhammer-y. And take a look at what happened with Grand Cathay. Would you like to say that China was ruled by gigantic fucking dragons and has been since the beginning? Clearly not. That's not what China is or ever was, but it very much is what Grand Cathay has come. And from that central core difference, all manner of other differences were added, but added within the paradigm of the Warhammer world, within the paradigm of its established way of dealing with magic, its established way with its world building that already exists, and saying what happens when you have a completely different culture engaging with this same basic underlying metaphysic, and how does it reflect? And I think that's been at the core of what a lot of the discussions that Sage and I have had. We're building this, then we put this on top. How are they going to see that? How does that work for them? How does that work for their history? Why are they doing these things? How did all these things come about? And then just chatting it all out is beyond fun, because you end up in some places that neither individual would ever have started at. And that in and of itself is part of the fun of creating stuff. So what was the core design for me? Make shit up and have fun.
Fun. Yeah.
Fun.
I think one of the other things that maybe will come out as we do more of the stream is that I was really interested in really, really ancient Japanese history, where a lot of the leadership figures were women, and how that changed because of the, Buddhism coming through, and the kind of like the different ways religions were seen through the ages, that slowly changed into a patriarchy. But my thought was, well, what if we didn't have that? Because in the Warhammer world, religions don't quite cross-contaminate in the same way. Maybe in this world, women aren't seen as less capable leaders. How would that change things? How would that affect their gods? All that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, hopefully that element will come through as well. It definitely is in how I try to portray Yume, in the sense that she doesn't feel lesser than any of the other male characters.
Query too.
And it's definitely
absolutely.
something, as a viewer, it's something that came through in Yume's sort of tales of Altdorf, particularly the sort of discussions about your mother and father's relationship and that type of thing. Like it was very clear there that the dynamic was much more complex than you would expect in an imperial kind of relationship. So.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Although I think you mentioned, Sage, about the impact that has on the gods and the religion, but also vice versa. The fact that in Warhammer there are feminine aspected gods, there are masculine aspected gods, there are gods that are a mix of both, there are gods that are changed depending on who's looking at them and when they're looking at them, and that has a really big impact, because just on the day when Sigmar, maybe not Sigmar, when Ulrich is like at his most stereotypically manly, for all we know, Ulrich will manifest in, I don't know, a 6'5" woman with long white hair, and everyone will have to suddenly reassess their understanding of what that male god is, in a way that in the real world we just haven't had those metaphysical challenges to our stereotypes, especially around gender. Seagoat says, I suppose in developing Nippon, you have the established empire world and mechanics to work with and against.
Yeah.
You were both nodding. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was very lucky from my side when developing ideas for Nippon, that I could just be like, what about this? And then Andy would just know whether that would fit or not. I think otherwise it would have taken a lot longer for me to go and double check things.
Definitely helpful having the Warhammer savant on your team.
Yes, no, yes, no.
The
yes,
Oracle.
No, yes.
And if any of us don't know, we can just ask the lore master of Sotek now.
Yeah, exactly.
Double win.
Suedjin says, I learned my original lore during the problematic era, and being educated about cultural appropriation, sensitivity, and so forth is something I really value. Purple Heart. So like all GMs make shit up as you go along, and that seems fair. Yeah, Ulrich has actually read Sonya. You heard it here first.
I'm not against that idea. I think it's pretty fucking awesome.
So Kilishandra also asks, when do you think it's worthwhile homebrewing lore over a published version of lore? Like, is there any intellectual property, Sage, that you're like, this is my friend who comes from the States calls it the one true chocolate. So the chocolate you had growing up, like, you won't be convinced that it's shit. So for her, it's Hershey's, even though to me that tastes like vomit. And to me, maybe, to me, although it's not for me, but like someone on our team, it was Cadbury's, and she's like, it barely has chocolate in it. So is there an IP that is like your one true IP that you would always want to play as is? You wouldn't want to change it? Or will you always want to change something?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think because I've been playing TTRPGs for maybe like 10 years or so, and most of those were like homebrew games, like 6 to 12 week sort of like short-ish games, which were mostly homebrew, based on different like settings and stuff, but homebrew at the end of the day. So I'm not too precious. I think recently I bought the Vaesen book, and that is awesome in itself, and the setting and the myth and stuff. I wouldn't necessarily want to change willy-nilly just because. I think it's cool on its own, but I wouldn't feel like I had to stick with it if I had an idea or somebody else is playing like a different version of it. I think there is merit to it if you're exploring like somebody else's culture or somebody else's world that's based on, their background or whatever. It's cool to kind of dive in head first, but at the end of the day, it's, as we said, whatever's fun, right? So
I'm going to drop a very a very targeted, specific example, which the vast majority of people won't get, but I'm using it anyway because it came up in conversation not long ago with someone I was tapping online when I was very ill, and I happened to remember it, so I'm saying it. So I was discussing with someone about cultural appropriation. And this is an example of when I think homebrewing is well worth doing, because often games have been written by a small team that comes from a specific culture, and they are often writing about things that are not their culture, and sometimes lifting without any awareness of what they're doing and dropping in details that are not necessarily good to drop. And I was having a conversation with someone online who I will not name, and they were like, this is bullshit. I just want to make the shit that I want. And I was like, great. I'm going to give you an example of something that I know you love and have massive issues with. And that's 7 Deadly Sins, the manga stroke anime. because it's set in the UK and it's made by people in Japan. Now, tell me, how accurate a depiction of the UK do you think that is? And I already knew what his answer to that was. It was going to be fist-thumping annoyance, because he was rather annoyed about how certain aspects of that particular anime, which he sort of loved, constantly used things that he sort of loved in the entirely the wrong way, and got him really upset. And I said, that, my friend, is why you can't do it elsewhere, and the problems that come with it. And suddenly he understood. And he was like, I'm wrong, which was really big of him, I thought, because he immediately backed down. He went, I'm wrong, I get it. I didn't get it at all, and now I do. And he then went off and he hired someone who was, in this case, Middle Eastern, to help him with the project he was on. And that was beautiful. So beyond that, there is what I think is when it's worthwhile homebrewing, and that is when someone has, not purposefully, but someone has done something you think is a bit rubbish and you want to homebrew and make it better. That's definitely when it's worthwhile. But the more important one is when it's fun.
Yeah, for sure. And that story is awesome. I'm gonna steal that way of explaining it to people.
It is. I had the exact experience of that. We saw a theatrical production of 39 Steps this week, and it was very good and very funny. But the bit when they go to a hotel in Scotland, and you had these actors from the Lake District doing deliberately comic stereotypes of Highlanders, and you're going, and Susan and I were just sitting there as the two Scottish people in the audience being like, no, we don't like this bit. We've liked the rest of it, but we don't like this bit. So, yeah.
Totally.
Sabo has asked this question with many question marks. Are also authors subject to cultural appropriation, building worlds about other cultures?
It depends what you mean by the word cultural appropriation.
Yeah,
I would say appropriation is often the word appropriation is super important, and that's when you're taking somebody else's stuff, making all the money, and not giving anything back. There's a far broader definition we could say, but that's a nice tight way to immediately say you can hone it in to a degree. Loving something else and trying to do an homage to something else and trying to really broaden everybody's horizons, including your own, is generally speaking a good thing. And it's one of the great joys, I think, of roleplay, where you can drop yourself into someone else's culture, where you can drop yourself into a different skin. You can try to experience the world in a different way. And that's marvelous, because so many of us are so wrapped up in our tiny little echo chambers that it helps you reach out to a degree. It's one of the reasons why so many gamers I know are some of the coolest people out there, because they have lived in other people's shoes. They have faced down emperors. They have talked down entire warring factions just with their words, God damn it, in a way that not normal people can't understand. They just have never done this shit. And that's good. So you could use cultural appropriation for a lot, and some people do. But I would say, broadly speaking, I wouldn't like to do that. I would much rather be as open as possible to as many minds as possible and reach out rather than constrain.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the sensitivity, the listening to people with actual lived experience, and like there's an interesting discussion. I'll pop a link in a second. But in the Ludonarrative Dissidents podcast, which, little plug, we're having Ross from Ludonarrative Dissidents is coming on next week, along with James, who's obviously one of our regulars. Thank you, super slick. But they had one about and it was a game I'd never heard of. It was fascinating. Called Outlaws of the Water Margin, which is like a tiny obscure game, but I think it's based on an actual work of historical fiction from Japan. But the guy who made the game was like obsessed with it and like really did do the research and did genuinely try. So even though he was British, like he did try and actually present something that was authentic to what was in this sort of work of fiction. And they had a very interesting discussion about that and how that fitted in the sort of spectrum of cultural appropriation. So I'll pop a link in, but it's well worth listening if you're interested in that as a topic.
Yeah. And I think there's a difference between cultural appropriation and acknowledging and gaining inspiration from other cultures. I think if we decided tomorrow to create a game about America in the 16th century and we didn't seek out anybody who had an expertise in that or had that background themselves, but we just decided that we were experts in it and could make it, that would be really weird. What do you think, Sage?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation. And a lot of good things can come out of appreciation, but it's how you decide to approach it, who you speak to. That's why like sensitivity consultants and things like that exist. That's their job. Consultants are a thing for a reason. But also, like, there's a difference between let's take somebody's religion and make like a funny stereotype out of it just to insult them, haha. Like, that there's ways of doing it that are more thoughtful than others. So yeah, it's just about picking what you're doing and why, and as long as you have good intentions and you're asking to speak to people, right, that's all you can ask for.
To give a direct example on that, just so we can all cringe a little bit because it directly relates to Warhammer.
Do we have to?
No, it's worth stating so that it's very clear. The original version of Nippon had as one of its religions, to speak directly to what Sage is there, as being loosely based on Shinto, and they called it Vimpto. Now, Vimpto is a fizzy fruit drink here in the UK. And well, juice originally, actually, yes. And that is not a good thing to do, because you're doing what they did with the rest of Warhammer, which is to make silly pun jokes about everything. But when it's your own culture, that's fine. But when it's someone else's, it's suddenly really not fine, because you're making fun of someone else, not yourself. And
particularly when it's a religion.
Changes everything.
Well.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly when it's something that people hold important. Yeah.
They named their Buddhist equivalents after an orange Simca, an orange car, which one of the James Workshop staff had. You can't do that. Orange Simca, because they're wearing orange robes. Just no. So, to cut a long story short, that's what you shouldn't do.
Yes, let's all punch up rather than down.
Indeed.
Yeah. To go on a different tack, I presume Mrs. Seagoat was looking over Seagoat's shoulder today. Homebrew Worldbuilding. Is this about building worlds where you make your own homebrew drinks? Actually, in the BC times, which are either before Cat or before COVID, when we used to have big New Year's parties, we did often try to come up with new cocktails, didn't we, Andy Leask? So we are partial to a cocktail in Rookery Towers. But I do feel like I now want to make an Alamena White's Guide to the Empire, which is just like a collection of recipes and cocktails for just like the most random things she's found.
Stew, and then stew, and then
yeah.
So, garnish of brown salt. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, one of my friends was running a Vampire the Masquerade game. Was it Vampire? Yeah. Or maybe it was Mage Ascension. Anyway, World of Darkness. And they were all people who worked in a nightclub. And that's how they knew each other. And so to kind of set the scene, other than kind of designing what the nightclub would be like, he asked each of them to come up with a cocktail and like name it for the nightclub. And then they all shared recipes and made them on their first session, and like kind of had them as they were playing. So, yeah, why not homebrew drinks?
So, Mrs. Seagoat, you were spot on.
That's brilliant, because that's doing double duty, isn't it? That's helping them with their characters in the world building, but it's also helping them bond, over the drink serving. That is very good.
Yeah,
very
Mrs. Seagoat is right. Sorry, I thought you meant that they all worked in a nightclub. All the players worked in a nightclub, but you mean all the players' characters worked in a nightclub? Like, I'm so confused. Yeah.
No, sorry.
I thought you meant they were all just like a group of players who happened to work in a nightclub and like shut the doors after hours. It was like, right, now let's get started on playing our vampires.
That would also be awesome. But no, the characters were working in the same nightclub. And yeah, all the cocktails were based on their characters, so it did help them think about what their character was like as well.
That's cool. We now make Mrs. Seagoat right. We now demand a question from Mrs. Seagoat every stream. So we can get her hot takes on the DTRPG industry.
Yeah, but don't give her any context for whatever it is.
100%. No context questions from Mrs. Seagoat. Oh, here's one. Roderick says, I don't really have a question, just want to compliment Sage on the, no spoilers, but did anyone ask about my parents' knife turning session before last? That's in the Lawhammer stream. It was really sad.
Yeah,
It was.
I felt a little bit evil asking that, but also I thought it would be a good role-playing moment. So thank you.
Quite right.
And you said it in such an adorably sweet tone of voice. Did anyone ask about my parents? Oh, I'm dying.
Yeah, the best bit of that was the look on Ed's face. That
Yeah.
was definitely the highlight of that moment. Was the
It's
I
good. It's
forgot
character
other
building
people had. Yeah, it is character building.
for Ed.
Sue Edgen says, yeah, it's such an puppet moment. Hawk oddly says, I almost started a game with my security co-workers when I worked at a Vegas nightclub.
Nice.
Nice.
In the 1985 Citadel miniature, ninja holding modern handgun going to feature.
No.
No.
Really, no. Probably not. No, don't let me withdraw on this. No.
So,
Yeah.
Seago asks, there are games out there where GM and players get to build and develop the world. Have you any recommendations for such games?
Well, there's one thing that pops into mind straight away. It's actually related to one of the other things I've done before Lowhammer, BL, where there's a game called Wonder Home. It's by Possum Creek Games. It's a GM-less kind of diceless game. The art is beautiful. Go check it out. Even just to look at the images. But essentially, it's kind of like a war has happened in this setting. It is now peacetime. All of the people who live here are like anthropomorphic animals. Let's explore creating enough stories around the aftermath of a war, and also just kind of like cozy nature-based kind of adventures of exploration. That one is very much, because it's mostly GM-less, it's all about creating the world together. And there are mechanics in the game and like lists for you to roll what a place looks like, what season it is, what seasonal festivity is there, what does it look like, what's the weather. So that definitely helps you with that. But I think in general, kind of all the games I like to play in at the very least have a level of that collaboration to it, even if it's not something as big as, working on Nippon with Andy. Like, you go into it in a session 0 saying, hey, this is the kind of story I would like to play in. Does this match the game you were pitching, and have a conversation, right? So you build the world together as well.
There's a few comments. So
Yeah,
the Quiet Year.
Quiet Year is a really good example of that, where you basically play a community that survived a sort of post-apocalyptic thing. And you kind of go around kind of like defining and building the world in a kind of around your settlement over the course of kind of 1 year, and then it kind of ends. And it's an interesting one because a lot of people play it just as a game, and that's great, and you could do that. But in our Discord, a lot of people were talking about how it's used almost as a world building tool for a homebrew universe, in that you play through a session of the Quiet Year, and that then gives you the place that your role-playing game is going to take place. That's your settlement. You now understand the world. You know the people who live there. You know what's scarce. You know what resources you do have, you don't have, and that then becomes the basis of your homebrew campaign, which I thought was an interesting way of a game being used to facilitate another game, which is
we do love a game within a game in Rookery Chapters, a mini game. Apocalypse World, is this a description of the Quiet Year or a different game?
No,
yeah.
that's a different game. And indeed, and again, for me to sound like a broken record and talk about Blades in the Dark again, Blades in the Dark is one of the Powered by the Apocalypse games that kind of follows on from Apocalypse World. And again, there is that element of, there are certain details of the world that are kind of fixed when you start playing, but as players, you then kind of pitch into the GM about what things have happened, and you kind of, like Blades in the Dark does it in it's like a heist mechanic. So basically, you don't plan the heist; you start the heist, and part way through, you almost have like a flashback type thing where you kind of explain things.
Yeah. Wait, we need somebody to break through this door.
Yeah.
Good thing we hired. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that because I've complained about heist movies. I think it's such an overused trope that they're explaining the plan while they're doing the plan. Like it just, like Ocean's 11 did it really, really well, and everybody does it now. It's like, and it just, I think it's really lazy to keep on doing it. So a thing that subverts that and makes it part of the mechanic, I really like that.
Yeah, that's good. And in general, Powered by the Apocalypse games, it's in the playbooks to talk about the setting as well, right? So that's really helps with that kind of thing as well.
So no, go for it.
Can I just read this one out? Hawk Audley says, I also played an interesting game based off the Quiet Year called The Hidden Lives of Trees, where you play a community of trees through the years and seasons.
Yeah, I love
That's
that.
cool.
So I'm old, and because I'm old, I'm old enough that an awful lot of the original role-playing games were basically all this, where at its heart you had a hex map and you went out and explored, and you and your players filled in the gaps, often with tables, and you figured out exactly what lay beyond the horizon as you move from place to place. And that cooperative story building, world building, and creation is so fundamentally ingrained within me whenever I play my games now, that the concept of not doing that for pretty much every game, regardless of how it's presented in the rulebook, is almost alien to me. For example, to use the example we were already drawing upon earlier with Lawhammer, Andy's order for his Sigmarite priest is one we just made up, but it's made up within the context of the given world, and also something that I had previously created for a book back in 2nd edition. We just codified something that was hinted at before. For Sage and her character, we're an entirely new made-up area. For Lindsay's character, an entirely new made-up set of rules that we've been building for each of them. And that, to me, is part of what keeps role-playing exciting and interesting for me. Now, a lot of modern role-play books tend to just focus in on an individual situation, give you enough to play like 10 sessions there, often with some tables to elaborate it out, and away you go. But for me, that's almost not a book. That's just what you do, and it's the stuff that you just make. It's one of the reasons I stopped buying role-play games to any great degree around about 15, 20 years ago, because they just became so reiterative. There was so little there that was new and exciting because of what came before.
And in terms of Rookery Publications, that's exactly what our design goals will be with the Coiled Crown in that world. And that is, I like to think of it like, there's a place called Lethem Craft Shop I used to go to, but any craft place will do as a stand-in for that. And it's like that feeling when you go into a craft place that's got like all the beautiful like different pieces of colors of card and colors of thread, and there's like loads of different things, and you could just do anything with it, and there's like just an abundance of like possibility and ideas, and I think that's like the joy of that feeling is what we want to bring to people when they open those books, to say, oh, that's a really interesting idea, either I want to play it or I could bring that into here, or I could do that with it.
How can I use it? Yeah, totally.
The thing I always remember at Lethem Craft Shop was the wide variety of sizes of googly eyes they had. They had honestly from tiny all the way up to like, you know, massive, like an ostrich egg size, and everything in between. Yeah,
I didn't know. It was also the first place that I saw Games Workshop stuff sold. It was an amazing place, but I didn't know you were a fellow Lethem Craft Shop visitor. They had amazing pancakes, really good milkshakes. It was just an amazing place.
Oh, this heavenly place. I need to.
Oh yeah,
I have also been, and she made me a convert. It's quite the craft shop, quite unlike any other I've been to. It's like a little maze. Which also plays really nicely into next week's subject as well, where we're going to be talking about architectural horror. That place could be an architectural horror story in the making for when it shuts. And trying to get out of that crafty nightmare.
Right. Righty theme stuff. Someone at work keeps sticking googly eyes on the HR posters, and management are not happy.
Someone?
We see you, Righty. We see you.
Yeah. So So, Hawk Godley says, finally convinced my friend group to try out Blades in the Dark for a month as we have to take a break while player is on vacation. I'm so excited to see them have more freedom to roleplay when not constrained by D&D's combat focus system.
Mhm.
Suedjin says, I always go crazy for the paper types at a craft shop. Yeah, and the puzzles, yeah. There was a question in here which I just when Jaleb's asked, wanted to go back to. In a game with a pre-established world building, how do you handle a moment when a player says something that contradicts that? When is it better to stop and correct course, and when can you just go, yup, that's now how it works?
I mean, as much as I do make some games for my own groups and like GM every now and again, obviously there are people with more experience here, but I feel like in my experience usually it's either cool, yeah, that sounds cooler than what I thought of, sure, let's do that, or maybe that's how you understand it, or maybe that's what you've heard, and then you kind of go from there, because especially in settings where maybe there isn't like an internet or equivalent, people will know different variations of stories and stuff. So it's very easy to go, well, that's what you think.
So, yeah, this is something that you get lots of different answers to, but there is definitely a current, let's say, tone. It's a direction, perhaps, in many modern roleplay books, which is to never say no. To always yes and, to go a little bit improvisational comedy on it. I'm now doing improv and everything is yes and on top of whatever anyone else brings to the table. And that works to a degree, but if you're playing an established setting or an established story that has an established tone, sometimes that just doesn't work. Sometimes somebody does something that is so contrary to what is the established world and goes against it that you're, as say, a games master, or perhaps as a group, if you're playing GM less, are in a position where you go, that doesn't quite fit. And there is an actual problem at the table. Do you then immediately clip in? Do you leave it till after? The question is not when do you do it then, it's when do you do it before. You should have probably had the conversation before you got to the table saying things are going to pop up, and that's fine. And sometimes you get it wrong, and sometimes we'll interrupt, or sometimes we won't, or sometimes we'll say it's cool. And it's about talking with all your players to decide how the best way of dealing with it should be, so that when it does pop up, if somebody clips in and says, oh, it's not like that, nobody immediately gets hurt or upset, or how dare you constrain my freedom? I want to have giant penises and everything. Because that's just who I am. You've had the conversation to hopefully dial back on all the giant interruptions. And that's quite important. So I would suggest that if you've got the imagination this may occur, as in you're thinking you've got a new group and you're not sure if it's going to occur or not, or you've already got a group where this is occurring a lot, instead of trying to deal with it at the table, deal with it before it hits the table and establish your own rules at your own table. I think.
Yeah. Unreliable narrators are great to hang contradictions on. I was actually thinking of the Shoggoths. I blame the Shoggoths.
I do like letting people get things wrong, though.
Or the Shaggoths.
They're Shaggoths.
Who knows?
Yeah.
When people get it wrong,
Well,
I want them to get it wrong.
The thing is with that is I've always thought they were Shoggoths. I have never known that they weren't Shaggoths, and he fucking knew that.
Because Shoggoths are a thing in Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah.
So,
I just thought they were the same word. I thought that they do same for both.
They're not the same, but it made me laugh.
No, I know that now. Alamenawai, no clue. Sorry, I sort of stumbled there a little bit as all my screens froze and everything. So, thanks, Surgeon. Let's have a look. So if you were building, have we looked at this one? Seago asks, when world building, do you build a detailed world, then develop where PCs explore, or do you make a rough sketchy outline and develop the world as the PCs interact with it? Yes.
Yes.
All of those things. Yeah. Yep.
I kind of like, it depends on the game, but I kind of like games where sometimes the setting and the things that are happening within it are quite contained, like the escape from the craft store nightmare, or like Powered by the Apocalypse games usually have that kind of like place as well. I like not having stories that are about the end of the world, and then be more like local, I guess. So in that case, you don't need to world build the whole thing, right? To be able to play in that. But then also Warhammer is the complete opposite, and it's great because of that, because you can pull so much from different areas. I try, more than anything, when I run games, I try and have something that is happening, that is going to happen regardless of whether the PCs are there. And if the PCs don't like it, they are more than welcome to interact with it, but they have to do it in a certain timeline and in a certain way, or it's going to happen. And that kind of keeps stories kind of taking along without it feeling too railroady. It's still the PC's choice, or the player's choice to do what they want in that world. But then that means that I have to have a little bit more planning on what is happening and why and where. So that I feel like it's unfair to only come up with plans or consequences after you know that what the players are doing, because it's not a competition against, well, at least the way I play TTRPGs, it's not me versus my players, it's we're building a story together. So I am accountable as well.
Andy Law says that it's not him against us, but he does take an inordinate amount of glee from the occasional fumble in ATA.
Well, it's fun. This actually is almost a perennial world building question. I recall sitting on a panel at a convention. This was in Propulsion, actually, and we had two massively different opinions to either side of me, and I was attempting to bridge the pair of them and failing completely because they were so I can't even get the word out, antithetical to each other. On one side, we had someone who was an author who said that every single last detail of their world was essential to pin down, so that when they moved you through as their, let's say, as the native guide through their world, and their characters moved from A to B to C to D, they required to have all of that knowledge in place so that they could then accurately portray it and have a living, breathing world. And they loved detailing everything. They spent ages doing it, right down to the currencies, exactly how much you could buy for however many brass pennies or whatever. And they had reams of world building content for their single novel that all this world building content was created for. They swore by it. And on the other side, the other author pretty much said, yeah, I just create what I need. That's it. Nothing else matters. I have a central core for my story, which is, I don't know, a central story about betrayal, say. And all that matters is that my characters are focused around this and getting to the plot points that matter, learning something along the way, having their individual character arcs, and getting to where they need to go. And then that means I'm not constrained for future books. And then on the other side, he immediately piped up, but you might contradict yourself. And his reply on that side was, don't care.
Don't care.
Yeah, totally. And they were beyond entrenched in their positions, and neither side was wrong, because they were both doing things that they really enjoyed, and they were both producing work that other people really enjoyed, but neither of them could really quite get to grips with that, because they were certain that their way was correct. And they both had very good arguments, and they both pitched against each other in a way that I found very difficult in my cartographical center to argue against, because they were so But yeah, the answer I think lies there, and that is there is no correct way of doing it. Do what you enjoy, drill into the details that really work for you in the games that you're building or the books that you're writing, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, you do you in some
way. You do you.
Seagoat says we had a great discussion a few weeks ago with B about the West Marches games, which is world building by discovering the unknown from a fixed point in space and time. I just want to say thanks to all our viewers, including Seagoat, because I think that's really sweet that we had a great discussion. You were all there. We had a chat. So thank you to everyone who comes every week in the live chat. Hi, if you're watching on YouTube afterwards, please do subscribe, share, and do all of those things. But thank you to our live viewers for keeping the chat really lively.
But this is definitely something that I think pretty much every author we've had on, a question similar to this has come up, and they've all given answers on a continuum. But and they're all just somewhere on there, and I think you have to just accept that it is easier. One of the ones I think is most interesting to give a call back to someone who was in our Chimera panel last year, Rebecca Zahabi, who'd written a fantasy novel called The Collarbound, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend it. And I enjoyed it because it was a really interesting story and really well written. But I particularly enjoyed it because she has a really unusual world. She does not explain it at all why it's like that. The world is flat. There's an edge, and the civilization we're in is at the edge of this flat world. Like water falls off, and there's like a rift that's like a valley that you can go through to the next bit, but it's all dark, and sometimes people don't come back. Maybe she's going to explain it in a future book. Maybe she's not. But I really enjoy. I find it really liberating that there wasn't, you know, like tens of thousands of years of history to explain why the world was this way, because it didn't matter to the story she was telling, which was about two particular people whose fates were intertwined, and that's what was important. And it was a great novel, terrific read, but really fresh in terms of that. So, yeah.
Hawk Oddly says, my favourite thing for character creation, which in and of itself is homebrewing, is give the facts I want to be true for my character and then let my DM fill in the facts that are also true because of what I've said about my character and the world around them. Yeah, Andy, on you go.
I was just going to say, this actually ties directly to an issue I was discussing with my daughter today. She just wrote herself the most marvelous background for her character and then went to the rules and found that the rules did not allow for it. Not because the type of character she built didn't allow, but because of the way the backgrounds work in D&D. They're so fixed and they're so rigid that her background that she had so creatively endeavored to build something awesome just didn't fit into the rules. And in some respects, it shows where rules can get in the way of creativity. And that's why I say homebrew, 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 get what works for your game and your characters that you're building.
Mm-hmm. I think also an element of randomity. I felt like when we moved from, well, we'd always played Wifrit, but we had a long running vampire campaign and we moved to Warhammer, and I was a bit worried, like, because in Vampire you've got the whole of world history, everything's so detailed and there's so much there. And I felt like random character generation seemed a little bit less serious than deciding something, but actually, the first character I rolled has just like become, it was the things that were random about her background were what became such features of her story because of Andy and what he took from the randomity. And it was really interesting to see that, because like I said, I thought it was a less serious way of making a character, but actually like a massive convert now of using randomity to spark those
it's a more creative version. It can be.
And the key thing with that as well is to not be too rigid in your randomity as well. So if you roll something that is legitimately too goofy to play, you don't play that. You just roll again. Like we're playing a fucking game at the end of the day, right?
And so how did we end up with like old giants in our party?
Random talent.
I think so as well. At the end of the day, the games I make and play, like in my home games, the characters don't know everything about the world, and therefore I have only so much concentration and focus to do these things. I'm going to spend my time working on other stuff that's going to actually make their game fun rather than detailing everything about the world.
So Svanuri says this has been really helpful. Bill says wonderful chat. Thank you, Sage, for coming on.
Bill's
That's
awesome.
pretty much we're almost at the end of today. Let's just see. There's the Colorbound link. Suejin says my training and work was in the hard sciences, so when my world violates certain laws of physics, I get anxious. And Seagull gets almost the last word. Violating the laws of physics is what we do as role players. Relax, it's all good.
Unless you're making rivers join together in the opposite way they should, it really annoys me.
Yeah, you do.
Because I make maps.
A wizard did it. A wizard did it.
A river that splits a continent in two. How does it work?
A wizard did it.
Magic. This is the wizard. It's magic.
It's magic. So thank you so much to Sage for coming on. It was great to have you. Hopefully next season we're going to have a few more Lawhammer cast members on for a big old Lawhammer chat, but we will see. Until then, thank you to all our patrons.
I've
Yeah.
got one thing to add as well. You may have noticed that I was really very, add several verys, ill for a good couple of months or so, and we fell behind on our masterclasses. And we have normally a masterclass every month detailing something fun and cool. So I'm going to catch up in the next couple of weeks and over the course of our break between seasons, because I can't believe we're about to finish season 5 and head into season 6 near the end of the year. That's actually ridiculous. One of the first ones I'm going to do is directly related to this, and is something that I have a strong passion for, and that's how to write up short, fast, little locations with bags of character so that you can homebrew your own, basically, town, city, or whatever else. I have a process for this that I have built over the course of multiple books. I'm going to slap out that process so that you can all see how to do it yourself, and then ping it away and do it at home should you wish. That's going to be awesome. Over the course of the break, I'll do a bunch of extra mapping ones. And if you're out there going, I want to see Andy show me how to map X, Y, or Z, now is your time to jump into our Discord and say, Andy, I want to see you map X, Y, or Z. And I'll show you how to do it. And that will be easy. We've done everything from showing you how to do Fallout style maps from the Fallout game to how to build cities, how to build continents, how to build all sorts. But if there's something you'd like to see me build, now's the time. If you don't tell me anything, I'll just make it up and throw something at you and we'll see what we get. So that's for the masterclasses. If you'd like to join our masterclasses, that is for the Brazen Rooks and above over on our Patreon. There, I've said my thing.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sage, for joining us. That was a really fun chat. And we will...
Thanks for having you.
Yeah, no problem at all. Next week is our final episode in this season. Until then, thank you, as always, to all our patrons, all the viewers who joined in with comments and chat. And until next time, all that remains for me to say is goodbye and caw, caw, caw. See you soon.
Bye.